let it breathe, make sure that everything is nice and stable all across the YouTube platform. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you guys see me okay? Let me know in the chat. Please let me know if I need to adjust anything. Welcome in, Broncos country. It has been one hell of a day in Denver. I'm Gage Madrid, Denver Broncos Syndicate, and the Broncos made a really interesting trade this afternoon. They couldn't stop with the uniform reveal or bringing in a veteran corner in Levi Wallace. They decided to address their quarterback position by trading for former New York Jets second overall pick Zach Wilson. In the trade, if we bring in this tweet right now from Ian Rappaport, it says, former Jets starting quarterback and number 2 pick Zach Wilson is on the move. Sources say he's being traded to the Broncos, hoping for a fresh start. The deal includes a late round pick swap for a 6th and a 7th, and the New York Jets will pay some of Wilson's roughly $5.5 million salary. So right off the bat, Zach Wilson is going to be extraordinarily cheap for the Denver Broncos. I imagine the Broncos aren't going to be forking out more than $1 or $2 million for Zach Wilson. So at the end of the day, even if he doesn't play a snap for the Broncos, he's going to be on our roster providing at bare minimum a cheap backup quarterback option. And I think that in itself makes this a good move. But of course, there is still a chance out there that Zach Wilson could see some playing time for the Broncos this year and maybe even start a game or two. We'll see what happens with the Broncos, how they want to approach quarterback in the draft this coming Thursday night. We will, of course, talk about that in this coming live stream, but just want to say hi to some people real quick. We got Ricky Samuel in the house saying, please get George Peyton out of here. We got Orange Crush. I like the move. Lots of upside for basically free. Young, physically talented quarterback paired with Sean. Good move in my opinion. I absolutely agree with that notion. I think that at the end of the day, Zach Wilson is a very physically talented player. He was drafted number 2 overall for a reason. The main reason I would argue that he's failed in the NFL is 1, a lack of structure around him, and 2, kind of struggling to grasp the game mentally between the ears, not being able to shut down his reckless, overly aggressive play. However, the numbers last year will indicate that Zach Wilson did get more conservative as the year went on, and that would somewhat indicate that Sean Payton would like what he sees there and maybe feels like he can squeeze the best out of Zach Wilson given his combination of being able to have just ridiculous highlight level plays. I mean, you see Zach Wilson run around, play backyard football among the best of them. It's just making those timing in rhythm throws consistently. That's where the issues are. The Jets offense was so conservative last year under Nathaniel Hackett that they couldn't even move the football. Maverick says, hopefully we still draft a quarterback. I'm here to tell you guys right now, Broncos country, I do not think that the Denver Broncos trading for Zach Wilson, swapping picks, basically sending a 6th round pick and getting a 7th back, getting a backup caliber quarterback on the cheap is not going to stop the Broncos from being aggressive if their guy is there in the first round. If they feel like they're in striking distance for whatever quarterback in the Big Four falls, then they will go up and get that quarterback. Be it Drake May or J.J. McCarthy, those are obviously the 2 that seem to be most likely to fall in the potential laps of the Denver Broncos. They are going to have to outbid the Minnesota Vikings, but if Denver feels strong enough about wanting to do that, then I feel like they will be aggressive and get that move done. I also feel like this wouldn't shut down the possibility of Denver trading back in the first round if they can't execute Plan A and still getting a first-round quarterback a little bit later on in the first round. Obviously, Bo Nix would fit that bill perfectly. I reported earlier on that Mike Kliss came on the Mainly Broncos podcast on the MHRT network, and he said that the Denver Broncos, even if they drafted a quarterback in the first round, were going to bring in a very notable quarterback. There was still a strong possibility of that happening. And I thought it was going to be Ryan Tannehill because that was the best available option on the free agent market, and the Jets had indicated had they not gotten a sufficient trade offer for Zach Wilson, they were going to keep him around as the potential number 3 quarterback. Obviously, they've got Aaron Rodgers there and they've got Tyrod Taylor there serving as the number 2. The Jets finally went out and got a veteran backup quarterback, but Zach Wilson would have remained in New York had they not gotten a sufficient trade package. Denver decided to pounce, and it's a move that I know is going to be very polarizing here in Broncos country. That's without a doubt. But I also feel like this is a calculated move by George Peyton and Sean Payton, providing them some insurance in the event that they can't land their quarterback. But again, I still feel like they're going to be very aggressive to get their quarterback in the first round of the draft or early in the second round in a trade back scenario where they'd acquire a second round pick. That is still something that we're going to keep an eye on Thursday. But to get a high upside backup quarterback who could have his best football ahead of him. If you look at how old Zach Wilson is, he's 24. He's the same age as Bo Nix and just a little bit older than Michael Penix Jr. Those are guys who are obviously heavily linked to the Denver Broncos if they go quarterback in the draft. So they're getting a guy who Denver might view in a similar capacity, even though he does have some NFL experience under his belt. The New York Jets last year were hoping to sort of reset with Zach Wilson and let him take a step back and learn under Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Aaron's Achilles blew out in week 1, and that completely shot that plan in the foot. But if Denver can execute maybe a somewhat similar plan, even if they get their quarterback, then they'll have a really interesting piece as a backup option, and they'd have maybe a trade piece later on if Zach Wilson plays well, say in preseason games, or if he does get in for regular season games. So that's another interesting avenue to this whole Zach Wilson saga for sure. Jets drafting a quarterback, says H. Dan Imrod. I don't know, man. I think the Jets definitely could be in play to get a quarterback, but if somebody like a Brock Bowers falls to them, or maybe even a Joe Alt, who in my opinion is the top tackle in the draft, they need to shore up their offensive line. They need to shore up their receiving core, get as much help around Aaron Rodgers as they can to go all in to try to win a Super Bowl this season. That is what the mindset should be for the New York Jets. But if they feel like they have sufficiently addressed their roster needs in free agency, they did bring in Tyron Smith as a free agent. They brought in some other help on the offensive line as well, John Simpson. And if they feel like they've adequately addressed those needs, maybe they do go quarterback, but I think they might be a little bit more in play for somebody like a Michael Pratt, maybe a Spencer Rattler. They don't have a second round pick this year because of the Aaron Rodgers trade, unless they acquired another one. I'm not going to look that up, but maybe they're in play for somebody like that as opposed to one of the first round quarterbacks. I still think Denver is very heavily in play, even though they did make this move for Zach Wilson. And at the end of the day, it's all about Denver also throwing as many darts onto the board as they can. If you don't consistently swing, you're not going to hit. And Sean Payton got a quote-unquote retread quarterback in Drew Brees. And yes, Brees was playing some really damn good football by the time he got injured in San Diego and hit the free agent market. He got Phillip Rivers as well, obviously. But if Sean Payton looks at this in a similar light as bringing in a guy like Drew Brees, who had a lot of question marks coming in, although most of those question marks, again, were surrounding his labral tear, then maybe Sean feels like I can get really good football out of this guy. He was in Sean Payton's own words, one of the worst coaches in the NFL last year in Nathaniel Hackett, and Zach Wilson wasn't an all-out disaster last year. He wasn't a complete and total mess like he had been for his first 2 years in the NFL. In fact, I think now is a good time to go ahead and bring in Zach Wilson's PFF page right here. And you're going to see that in 2021, he had a PFF passing grade of 54.8. 2022, stuff just completely went off the rails. 43.3 overall PFF passing grade. Just really, really putrid. 6 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. 8 big-time throws to 17 turnover-worthy plays. Absolutely gross. Zach Wilson, in 439 dropbacks in 2023, had it was 10 big-time throws to 12 turnover-worthy plays, so kind of a even ratio there. In fact, the percentages were the exact same, 2.6 big-time throw percentage to 2.6 turnover-worthy play percentage. 8 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, completed 60% of his passes. Somebody who threw a lot of passes short of the line of scrimmage, didn't take a whole lot of risks. I remember the Jets basically beat the Denver Broncos last year, yes, by getting some turnover luck, but also by just running the football down their throat and not asking Zach Wilson to do much. In one of Zach's most efficient games last year, in fact, that was his second highest graded game on the season, according to PFF passing wise, he was just throwing a lot of safe short completions, and dare I say, Nathaniel Hackett actually put him in a position to be somewhat successful in that game against the Chiefs. And obviously you could argue that the New York Jets should have won that game if it weren't for a slightly BS pass interference call, or really BS pass interference call. If the Jets had won that game, maybe the whole perception of Zach Wilson would have completely changed, but obviously it didn't. It wasn't sustainable. Those 3 games that he had of relatively decent play, Kansas City, Denver, and Philadelphia, he went completely back off the rails again, and it all culminated in a 37.0 overall passing grade at Buffalo, which was just a really, really dismal performance. That got him benched for Tim Boyle, and then eventually he did get back in there because Boyle was just completely ineffective, and then got injured, unfortunately, in Miami in Week 15. Trevor Siemian ended up starting the rest of the season for the New York Jets. He has it in him physically. He's very physically talented, but he's got to learn how to play within structure, read out the defense, just like Jeremy's saying right here. He's got to learn how to play conservative, safe football. If he's not able to do that, then he's not going to be successful at the NFL level. So at the end of the day, man, do I think that Zach Wilson is going to move the needle and be the next franchise quarterback for the Denver Broncos? No, I absolutely do not. But do I think that Zach Wilson does have a chance to maybe revive his career in Denver, get viewed in a more positive light, and maybe he can have like a Ryan Fitzpatrick or a Gardner Minshew kind of career as a backup journeyman? He definitely would bring a lot of fun in terms of media, and you can look into Zach Wilson's personal life off the field. I'm not going to get into it here, but it definitely brings for some media headlines that are going to be perpetrated here in Denver now that Zach Wilson is a Bronco. But again, if there is any coach out there that Zach Wilson can be revived with, it's Sean Peyton. Zach Wilson's never had an offensive-minded head coach in his career. He's been with Robert Saleh for his entire 3-year NFL career. First 2 years of his career, his offensive coordinator was Mike LaFleur, and then last year, as we all know, obviously, it was Nathaniel Hackett. Neither one of those guys really scream elite offensive coaching. Mike LaFleur, obviously, a lot more so than Hackett. But if Zach Wilson can truly get top-tier offensive coaching, then maybe that's what it takes. And I've seen concerns about immaturity with Zach Wilson as well. I think last year, a lot of those concerns were put to bed. When you look at his media press conferences from 2022 to 2023, you saw a legitimate growth as a person in Zach Wilson. Remember, the man's only 24 years old. He and I are basically the same age. We're still trying to figure out life, man. I don't have my you-know-what together at the age of 24. There's no way that he could, being thrown into this position at such a young age. you could see the growth and the maturity. In 2022, Zach Wilson was throwing his teammates under the bus and not taking accountability for bad play. In 2023, after he had arguably his best game of his NFL career to that point against the Kansas City Chiefs, he's the one who's taking the blame for a loss that wasn't even his fault. So you saw that change and growth and maturity in Zach Wilson, which is really, really good to see. And I think that that's something that's going to go a long way in terms of Zach Wilson reviving his NFL career. You could tell when Aaron Rodgers got to the Jets, Zach Wilson was committed to learning everything he could behind Aaron and was committed to being that sponge behind him. Unfortunately, again, like we talked about, that plan completely got derailed in week 1 when Aaron blew out his Achilles. Maybe Zach Wilson would be viewed in a completely different light if he did get that time to sit back, learn, and get better. The Broncos making this move basically gives them a cheap backup quarterback option. And I do think that it puts Jarrett Stidham on notice a little bit. Let's take a look at the Denver Broncos' current salary cap situation according to Over the Cap. If the Broncos were to dump Jarrett Stidham's salary, I'm not going to say they'd do it now. They'd probably do it after training camp. That's $5 million off the books right there. So if the Broncos feel like they want to save an extra $5 million, they get their guy in whatever round it is in the draft, then they're, I feel like, comfortable and confident moving forward with a quarterback room of, let's say, Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, and Ben DiNucci as the third developmental quarterback. You could save $5 million and invest those resources into offensive line, receiver, maybe tight end. I know Denver still needs to invest some more resources into that position. So I think that this is something that gives Denver a lot more flexibility in the event that they do want to dump off Jarrett Stidham. This is George's last year, DJ says. I think he's getting fired after this pick. We'll see, man. It's all going to depend on how things pan out. I think that George Peyton wants to be a little bit more conservative when it comes to the draft of this year, whereas Sean Payton, seemingly from the press conference, wants to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe move up to get his guy. If George Payton hinders the Broncos' ability to do what they want, then I do feel like he might not be here. But if the team's all on the same page in terms of vision and philosophy for how they want to build this thing for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then George Payton may get another chance to stick around. Ownership inherited George Payton. They did not handpick him like they handpicked Sean Payton. So the leash is going to be a lot shorter for George Payton naturally than Sean Payton. But Sean Payton's also on the record saying that he works really, really well with George Payton and wants to have a similar relationship that he did with Mickey Loomis for all of those years in New Orleans. So I don't know, man. It all depends on how the Broncos look at it. The fan base and the media can view George Payton in one light, but it's all going to depend on how ownership and the rest of the Broncos front office views George Payton at the end of the day, and also how Sean Payton views him, because if Sean Payton comes to the Broncos ownership and says, hey, I don't think that we can work together with George anymore, I think that it would be best for the team long-term to part ways with George, then I think that would indeed happen. But there's no evidence to this point that would indicate that is going to happen. Cheap backup, Sam Darnold went for $10 million last year. That's a very good point. And Sam Darnold is now regarded as, or he was regarded as, one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL last year. And this year, he does have a chance to start out the gate for the Minnesota Vikings. He's got a really good relationship with Josh McCown, who's the Vikings' new quarterbacks coach. So, I don't know, man. I think that maybe Zach Wilson could come to Denver, have that year under Sean Payton, really get a chance to absorb as much information and knowledge as he can with his first offensive-minded head coach. And you never know, maybe he could now be viewed in the similar light as Sam Darnold. That would be a very interesting scenario. Do you think this is the last chance for Zach? Absolutely. Absolutely. If Zach Wilson does not show consistent improvement in Denver, then he's not going to be in the NFL any longer. He'll probably have to go to the UFL in 2025 to revive his career if things don't work out well for him in Denver. But if he doesn't get any playing time in the regular season because Denver's found their quarterback, then if he does well enough to impress teams in the preseason and also does well enough in the classroom, Sean Payton will obviously pass that information along to other teams and put in the good word for him in the event that they let him go as a free agent after this season, because I don't think that his fifth year option is going to be in play here. So if the Broncos let Zach Wilson go as a free agent after this season, then, or wait a minute, no, he'll be under, this is year 4. This is year 4 for Zach. So yeah, he'll be walking after this year. Then maybe Sean Payton will put in a good word for him and be like, hey man, this guy has put in the work. He's put in the effort. He looks a lot more improved on the practice field and in the preseason. This is a guy that you want on your roster. That's something that I could very easily see happening, but it's all going to depend on Zach Wilson's effort and Zach Wilson's work ethic. This is what he wanted. He wanted to get a fresh start in Denver, and that is what he is going to get. Sherry says, I say take Bowers and Rattler or Pratt later on and roll with it. We'll see, man. I do think that is something that is more in play now, but I also don't think that Denver is going to be as bad of a football team as the media is painting and as some of Broncos country believes they will be in 2025. You have to remember, Sean Payton has never coached a team that has had double-digit losses in his entire coaching career. He hasn't done it. So I don't think that he's going to be in a position where he's going to put the team in a position to lose games. He could have done that last season after the team started off 1-5. They could have torn the roster down to the studs, and they could have quote-unquote tanked and gotten a guy in Caleb Williams who Sean Payton is on the record saying is a generational talent. Sean opted not to do that last year and ride things out with the current state of their roster, and that's where it got us now. I don't think that Sean Payton's going to do this in a situation where the 2025 quarterback class is nowhere near as strong, and there's no clear-cut guy in that class right now who is a generational player who's head and shoulders above everybody else like Caleb Williams is in this class. So I think that if the Broncos feel like J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Drake May, whoever it is their guy in this year's class, they're going to be aggressive and go up and get him. Truthfully, I feel like Jaden Daniels might be the Broncos' true love child. He's my QB1 in this class, aside from Caleb, because, again, I put Caleb in his own category. So when I evaluate this year's class of quarterbacks, it's everybody aside from Caleb, basically, and Jaden is my QB1 in the everybody aside from Caleb category. And so I absolutely feel like the Broncos could have been in a position to get, or could have wanted to be in a position to get Jaden Daniels, but he is going number 2 overall to the Washington Commanders. There's really no doubt about that any longer. So Jaden Daniels is going to be off the board. Strong chance Drake May will be off the board as well to the New England Patriots. So it's going to be J.J. McCarthy and how much the Broncos really do love him to come up and get him. If not, then they may stand pat a little bit, grab a Bo Nix, who I still feel like the Broncos would feel confident about. And I also think that Bo Nix fits really, really well in a Sean Payton offense, playing in structure, quick in-breakers, quick stuff over the intermediate middle of the field. I think that Bo Nix does a really, really good job with that, and I think that he will do really, really well in a Sean Payton offense. So if you think that Bo Nix isn't going to be available in a trade-down scenario, I'm not opposed at all to staying pat at 12 and taking Bo Nix if you feel like he can develop and be the Broncos quarterback for 10, 15 plus seasons. Yeah, man, I think that Bo Nix is a guy that the Broncos, he would be a consolation prize if they couldn't get one of the top 4, but he's not a bad consolation prize at all. Is George Payton staying with the Broncos? Right now he is, but like I talked about earlier, if George Payton is not on the same page as the rest of the Broncos brass, Sean Payton and the ownership, then maybe the team will opt to part ways after the draft, but it's all going to be dependent on if George Peyton and the rest of the Broncos are on the same page philosophically about how they want to build this team for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, All right, Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to wrap this thing up here. Before we check out, if you could just do me a big favor and leave a like on this stream, I would really appreciate it. Helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out, and it helps us get seen by more and more members of Broncos country, just like you and me. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the little notification bell next to it so you never miss when we upload. And until next time, Broncos country,